My name is Gustav Wollentz, and I'm a researcher and project leader at the Nordic Center of Heritage Learning and Creativity. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this interesting conference. I'm very happy to participate today. I will talk about landscapes of difficult heritage, about remembering and commemorating painful and contested pasts. And it will be based on field work that I carried out in Bosnia and Herzegovina and in Kosovo during 2015 and 2016 as part of my PhD research at the Kiel University in Germany. Focus here will be on memory specifically, and on the way individuals make heritage meaningful through different actions and different strategies. As I will also try to show in this presentation, these actions and strategies are actually often oriented towards an imagined future as well. So in many ways, this presentation tries to connect the past, the present, as well as the future, finding these kind of connections and these links. As I mentioned, it's based on my research at the Graduate School Human Development in Landscapes at Kiel University that I carried out in between 2014 and 2018. And the research was recently published last year in the series Palgrave Studies in Cultural Heritage and Conflict. And for those who are interested, you can try to find this book because it will go into much more details, of course, of what I'm saying, and it's also going to present more case studies. Here in the presentation today, I'm going to focus on Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina and on the gazebo monument, which is connected to a medieval battle in Kosovo. These were the main questions that kind of guided my research, which was very much focused on time, on the temporalities of difficult heritage. The way that difficult heritage influences the present does not obey to a linearity. I was focusing on the fact that the way that the past influences the present acts in a very non-linear way, where many different temporalities can be simultaneously present. That was my kind of entryway into the work that I did, to show how this multiplicity of temporalities can be present in one and the same landscape, influencing the way that we make meaning to the heritage in it. So these were the main questions that I was trying to answer within my PhD research. All of these ones are not going to be dealt with in this presentation, but I think it's good to have as a framework of what I was working with and the kind of questions that I was trying to address. Before we move forward, it is also important to get a sense of how I am and was approaching the concept of heritage within my fieldwork. Here I was very much building upon some of the influential theories presented by researchers such as Laurie Gaines Smith and Rodney Harrison, and also Wisnia Kisic, which is moving away from what has been called the authorized heritage discourse towards a more inclusive heritage discourse. And you can see the kind of distinction between the authorized one and the inclusive one in the table there. What I want to emphasize in this presentation here is the fact that within the inclusive heritage discourse, there is a move away from seeing heritage as something that is primarily material and physical, towards seeing it as something that is inherently intangible, something that is to see within the inclusive heritage discourse, heritage is seen as a meaning-making process that is continuously negotiated in the present, which is very different from the authorized heritage discourse, where the materiality is emphasized and where meanings and values are seen as intrinsic and inherent within these physical, within the physicality of heritage. The second point within the inclusive heritage discourse is that all heritage is being seen as inherently dissonant. All types of heritage has a multiplicity of different interpretations and meanings depending on who you ask. There's always a multiplicity understandings of any type of heritage. So there is an inherent dissonance within heritage where certain stakeholders may lay claim or may lay authority towards the heritage in question, suppressing other views and perspectives. There's always an inherent dissonance. But this dissonance does not have to lead to an open conflict. It all depends on how this dissonance is being managed. Generally, within the inclusive heritage discourse, emphasis is not placed upon trying to reach a consensus through heritage, because consensus is anyway impossible. But it's rather to create dialogue, to listen to get each perspective to be kind of listened to and not suppressed, without the aim of necessarily trying to reach a common agreement between all different stakeholders. So it's a constant negotiation which is not self-evident. It's not self-evident how this dissonance, this kind of conflicting meanings should be treated in the most sensible way. My approach was very much bottom-up in this case, not top-down. My research was very much based on interviews and taking in perspectives and building up an understanding of this multiplicity of different meanings that the heritage was employed within. Sometimes these were also contradicting and contesting each other. So variation was very much of interest to me. And also the way that people actively used heritage, not only in order to reinforce something, but in order to create new meanings, new values, new identities, and aim it towards a different kind of future. These aspects were really interesting to me. But if we accept that heritage is inherently intangible and born through practices, which is very much within the inclusive heritage discourse, it also follows that we need an approach to memory which kind of supports this. And here I was using Paul Connerton's work. Paul Connerton was a sociologist. He quite recently died, and he was a very influential one when it comes to specifically memory. And what I think is very useful with the work of Paul Connerton is that he recognizes the embodied aspects of remembrance as well as the physicality of memory, the space of memory. So one interesting distinction when it comes to memory that Paul Connerton does is a distinction between incorporating and inscribing practices. And incorporating practices are the practices that are embodied, that are kind of routinized, that are a routine for us, that might be even acted out subconsciously, that is very standardized, and he even argues that they are in many ways ritual in character. They are repeated on a regular basis, and they are essential for societies on a collective level to remember the past or certain events. And then we have inscribing practices. These are the actual acts of actively trying to preserve, trap, and store information, like building a monument, remembering, commemorating something. That would be an inscribing practice. Also writing a document, detailing a certain event. That's also an inscribing practice. This distinction is interesting, but it's also important to remember that these two different practices are also interconnected with each other. Furthermore, if we accept that heritage is inherently dissonant, which I mentioned before within the inclusive heritage discourse, we also need a theory on the negotiated meaning of the past that helps us localize and theorize dissonance within the production of narratives. And here I was using Michel Rolph Trullot's Silencing the Past. The interesting thing with Michel Rolph Trullot, who's also passed away a few years ago, is that he argued that every narrative that we construct in order to make sense of the past, and we always do that, we construct narratives in order to make sense of the past, and we also take in other narratives constantly when we watch the television or when we listen to a presentation. We always, these narratives are present, these narratives of the past are present everywhere, because if we don't make narratives out of the past, what we get is usually chaos. There's no order, there's no structure to it. So the narratives of the past are everywhere. But every narrative, and this is why this is the interesting part of Trollo's research, every narrative that is constructed include inherent silences, each and every one, because a narrative cannot include every aspect. There's always that which is there and that which is not there. And some of these silences, they may not be deliberate or consciously chosen, but they can also be very consciously and deliberately chosen. But they are very much crucial for actually understanding this constant negotiation for how the past is made meaningful in the present. And you can actually argue that the past is very much present through its silence. And what Trollo is arguing for is that one responsibility that both historians and archaeologists have are to expose these silences within the narratives, to make them come visible and into the light, and also understand the underlying reasons and causes for why these silences are present within the narratives. So before I present some of the fieldwork, and I will start with some of the results from Mostar, I think it's important to just give a little bit of a background to the situation. So during the breakup of Yugoslavia, the heritage was widely targeted for destruction, and it was targeted by each side in the wars, and especially religious buildings such as mosques and both Orthodox and Catholic churches, as well as synagogues were being targeted during the wars. And this was also very much an attempt of kind of erasing the memories of a certain ethnic group within a city, for example, erasing the heritage of them as a way to erase the fact that they had ever been there. For example, in the city of Zvornik, the mayor of the city of Zvornik stated after the final mosque was destroyed that there has never been any mosques in Zvornik, even though everyone knew that the mosques had been in the city of Zvornik, which is of course a very remarkable and horrendous thing to do and say. So these destructions, these acts of destructions of heritage, were very much performances of ethnic identity, of conjurings of ethnic identity, and manifestations of an us in relationship to an other. And in many ways, during the reconstruction process, these kind of conjurings of ethnic identities have continued in the reconstruction process, because the actors involved in the reconstruction processes have often been divided along the same ethnic lines that they have also been aiming to overcome. So in many ways, this ethnicization of heritage has continued in post-war former Yugoslavia up until today, and is very much present in the city of Mostar, which I will start speaking a bit about now. Let me now present some of the results from the fieldwork that I carried out in Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina during 2015 and 2016, where I interviewed a selection of the local population who, and a majority of those I interviewed had experienced the war from within Mostar, and I interviewed people from the different communities in Mostar. And Mostar is usually being described in media and also in research as a divided city, where the division goes between a Bosnian Croat dominated western side and a Bosnian Muslim or Bosniak dominated eastern side. And it is usually in terms or in the light of this division that Mostar is understood and approached. And it is also in the and if you look at the official commemorations in the city of Mostar, they are very much connected to this division, since there are no commemorations from commemorating the recent war that commemorates all the different groups or communities in Mostar. The commemorations are divided along ethnic lines. Mostar is maybe most famous for this, the famous Ottoman bridge Starry Most that was destroyed in November 1993 and reconstructed in 2004. And many of you have probably seen this bridge before, the one that you see on the photo there. When I interviewed people in Mostar about the commemorations, and many of them approached them as political charades that rather divided people rather than connected people. Many people, in other words, had a negative attitudes towards the memorials themselves, as well as to the ceremonies connected to them. But there are also very much visible silences within the heritage of Mostar and Bosnia and Herzegovina in general. And the loudest silence, the silence that makes the loudest noise, would be the neglect of the Yugoslavian past, the neglect of the socialist past. Here we have some photos from the partisan monument in Mostar, which has been declared a national monument, but it is generally littered with graffiti, often displaying fascist messages. The nature within the monument is very unkempt and wild, and it's even used for garbage disposal by as you can see on this photo there. This despite the fact that it's actually a monument that is very much cared for by a lot of the people I interview, and many people I interview are actually extremely sad about this neglect of this monument and the neglect of the socialist past in general, because it's a past that means a lot for people. The issue is that the Yugoslavian past is connected to values that the current more nationalistic parties want to distance themselves from, and it doesn't align either with efforts from the European Union of reconstructing heritage, because the European Union are more focusing on liberal values and are a bit. The efforts of reconstruction that are supported by the European Union are also not connected to the socialist past. So it doesn't fit with any of the different agendas of reconstruction work. The interesting part is that from a bottom-up perspective, the socialist past is actually employed and used often on a regular basis, not least by young people who actually never themselves experienced the socialist past in any length. Here we have one interesting example of a group of young activists painting an electrical station as a monument to the miners. This is located in Rudnik, where an important mine was located, and so this monument was dedicated to the miners, and it was an indirect response to a ethno-national monument that had just been constructed in the district of Rudnik. So it was in response to one of those memorials which were more exclusive or excluding people. This memorial, the idea was that through this kind of, for example, through focusing on other identities, for example, like the working identity, other values than the purely ethnic ones can be highlighted. So it was an interesting way of employing the socialist past to maybe highlight an alternative way forward as well. So these initiatives happen bottom up, but they are not supported by any of the authorities or the heritage institutions in the city. And they are so seldom being focused upon, really. They don't get much attention, but they are present. The socialist past is present in its silence. I was also looking at the role of the ruins in Mostar, because the city is still, the ruins are very much a presence within the city, and it's for many people it's a clear reminder of the war. But when speaking to especially the older generations in Mostar, it was a reminder that they didn't find welcome. It was not something that it was not a positive presence within the city at all. Most of the older generations simply wanted to see the ruins and buildings reconstructed so that they can move towards the Mostar that they imagine Mostar should be looking like. Many people were also very angry at tourists who were coming to Mostar to just be interested in the war, and this trend of dark tourism was not something that the citizens of Mostar approved of, because it was not the Mostar that they imagined. It's not the Mostar that they love and care for. But when switching perspective to the younger generation in the city, another picture started to emerge where many of the ruins were actually actively employed. Here we can see one of a ruin on an Austro-Hungarian building from around 1900 that was also formerly used as a university library before the war. Here we can see this ruin was very much employed by young people, also in forms of youth activism, and in forms of, and also in terms of doing activities together. So the young people, they told me that these ruins, they were used as safe spaces for the young people to do activities that maybe older generations wouldn't approve of or accept of. And it also was ideal spaces for youth activism, and activism that were deliberately targeting, you know, some of the issues, political issues in the city. For example, you see the photo here, they had painted the pillars there in different colors just to highlight other identities than the ethnic ones. And so it was directed specifically at this ethnic division in order to pinpoint other, you know, other connections. And so in many ways, these ruins for the young people, they are not serving specifically as memorials of the war, but more rather for places of, you know, looking forward. That doesn't mean, of course, that the young people are not aware of the war or do not know why these buildings stand in ruin, but rather they can be seen as a way for the young people that are using these ruins to gain a certain degree of authority over the past, and also challenging these narratives of suffering and victimhood that are very prevalent, you know, in the commemoration processes and the commemoration activities that are authorized. So there's also an interesting street art festival that is organized annually in Mostar, where many of the ruins and the walls of the ruins, as well as other spaces, are being painted, and there are actually graffiti artists coming from all over the world, and also local graffiti artists who are painting the ruins and other walls and spaces with beautiful art, but also sometimes political art. And Marina Mimosa, who was the initiator of this, she said that I was always inspired by our public space. After 20 years, we still have a lot of damage and ruins on the streets like the war was yesterday. All around us still are ruins, and that in some way inspired me to bring art in our public space. So in a way, this is a way to kind of transform these ruins into something that is more creative and forward-oriented and positive. And as I interpret some of these results here, it clearly showcases the value heritage has, not only in order to look backwards or recreating a past, but very much that heritage is involved in heritage, and also the reconstruction and use of heritage is more about rebuilding futures than about recreating a past. This is very much true in a post-war context. Steph Jansen, who's also been a researcher in Bosnia and Herzegovina, has showcased the need in order for people to move on after a war and acquire a sense of belonging in a place. It is essential that people feel a sense of a future in a place, that there is a future in that place, and that the place is invested with hope for the future. And I think in many ways these results highlight the significance in considering not only how sites of difficult heritage refer to the past, but also whether and how they can act as places for looking forward, and also that these two aspects do not need to be mutually exclusive at all. I will now talk about the second case study that I will present in this presentation, which is the gazebo monument in Kosovo. So the memorial space in Kosovo is different than that of Mostar. The vast majority of the population in Kosovo are Kosovo Albanians, whereas Kosovo Serbians mostly live in protected enclaves, often quite separated. It is just a little bit more than 20 years since the war ended, and the Serbian government has still to recognize the independence of Kosovo. In this case, I will discuss the gazebo monument on the field of Kosovo, which is located a few kilometers northwest of Pristina. And in Kosovo, I also did in-depth interviews with a selection of people, both Kosovo Serbians and Kosovo Albanians, who lived close to or at the site of the medieval battle. that I will talk a little bit about soon. So the monument itself was constructed in 1953, and it is in remembrance of the medieval Battle of Kosovo between the Ottomans and a coalition of Christian forces that occurred in 1389. This myth of the battle has been highly misused by Serbian politicians as well as religious leaders to claim an eternal right to the land of Kosovo. During the 19th century, it was very much used against the Ottoman Empire, but since then it has now, and up until now, it is very much used against Kosovo Albanians and against the independence of Kosovo. So in recent years, this rhetoric of entitlement was also famously expressed when, or infamously expressed when Slobodan Milosevic gave a speech at the site at the 600th anniversary of the battle in 1989, which you can see a photo of there. Also, at every so-called Vidovdan, which is a celebration held annually at the anniversary of the battle, occurring on the 28th of June, Serbians, not only Kosovo Serbians, but also Serbians very much from Serbia, gather at the Gazemesa monument, with many of them singing nationalistic songs and wearing nationalistic clothes. Because of these outright provocations taking place, these remembrance practices increases tension within the region. And the future envisioned through this, more like the future envisioned through these institutionalized practices is one of a Kosovo very much divided between Kosovo Albanians and Kosovo Serbians. Specifically with the Gazemesa monument, I examined how temporalities were actively produced surrounding difficult heritage in order to highlight that people are not simply passive recipients of heritage and its various temporalities, but also may play an active role in their production. I was working specifically with temporalities and the way time was being actively employed. And among the Kosovo Albanian population, I noted a temporal, what I call a temporal positioning, which was aimed at gaining distance to the past and locating the Gazemesa monument into an irrelevant long-gone history instead of heritage. You can see an example of this here. This female director of a kindergarten, which was Kosovo Albanian, she said that the Gazemesa monument was hundreds of years old, and any changes to it would probably make it lose its originality. It made the issue of responsibility irrelevant, and it made it distant and unconnected to the present. It was a way of dealing with this difficult heritage. To the point here is the fact that the Gazemesa monument was actually constructed in 1953 and is not hundreds of years old. But the way that people temporarily position heritage does not always connect to the actual age of a monument. We can also see the way that temporality works with the Kosovo Serbian teacher that I interviewed, who connected the Gazemesa monument and the Battle of Kosovo very much to the present day, about tracing a continuity to the present and linking it to somehow eternal or mythical values and issues concerning, for example, East and West, concerning Christianity and Islam. And this way of kind of breaking down temporal borders and connecting extremely distant events to the present was commonly used among the Kosovo Serbian population in order to kind of showcase the continued importance of the Vidovdan tradition. Of course, there were also a lot of variation present here, both within the Kosovo Albanian population as well as within the Kosovo Serbian population. These are just two examples, but they are examples of how time and temporality worked actively by people. This was not a passive way of using the Gazemesa monument, because it served a function in the present. And the way that the landscape were very much connected to the way of the time was employed. For example, there is a myth that a specific kind of flower called Bosu is growing on the field of Kosovo, and it has the color red due to the blood of the fallen soldiers of the battle. But there was one woman, a Kosovo Serbian woman, I spoke to, who said that there are no flowers growing like that anymore, and that is because less people remember those times nowadays, because people are forgetting to remember, and that there are less Kosovo Serbians in the landscape. Here we can see how actually the time and landscape becomes infused here, but also that it becomes a very political a political employment of what is growing and not growing in a landscape. When it comes to the kind of, I mentioned before that to position the gazebo monument into a distant and irrelevant long gone past was a way of coping with it by many in the Kosovo Albanian population, because it made it irrelevant. It made it, and it also made the Vidodan tradition and all the ethno and all the kind of all this usage of the monument in order to divide, it made it irrelevant. That kind of employment lessened the difficulty of this heritage for the Kosovo Albanian population. I also noted other kind of strategies in order to cope with a site of this difficult form of heritage. And one was the incorporated embodied practice of avoidance. Many people that I interviewed among the Kosovo Albanian population who even had gone to the site, the field of Kosovo and the site around the battle for picnics before the war, for leisure activities because it's beautiful there, had stopped going there after the war. They were not going there any longer, in other words. The certain embodied practices had stopped occurring, in other words, as a result of the war. It became more of an avoided place in the landscape, or a place that people did not go to any longer. And some people also actively really did not want to go there anymore. They actively refused to visit the site. The other aspect that I noticed very much among the Kosovo Albanian population was the production of trivializing narratives, to kind of trivialize or make fun out of this battle and the legacy of it. For example, that it actually was a loss of the Christian forces, and why are people celebrating a loss? It is funny, you know, that people were laughing and joking about it. And this is also connected very much to the fact that humor is often a liberating force in order to kind of overcome or move forward. That humor can serve a positive function in such situation in order to kind of cope or deal with something that feels stressful for a person. So in many ways, I interpret these acts as acts of unmaking them, making the site as heritage, unmaking heritage. It's because if we accept, for example, arguments that has been put forward by Sharon MacDonald and others, that heritage is often regarded as a legitimizing discourse, which is more or less sacred and indisputable in nature. That is often how heritage is being interpreted. Then acts of trivializing it or avoiding it are attempts of profanation, making it profane and non-sacred, and thus not making it part of heritage, but making it part of the past and making it part of history, but kind of distancing it as heritage, as relevant to the present and contemporary times. That's how I interpret it. And that individuals are actively employed and using this site in order to unmake it as heritage, but by locating it into a distant past. So the gazebo monument raises the question whether the monument in its current state and role is actually best left trivialized and avoided by the Kosovo Albanian population, and that it may be precisely through the acts of avoidance and trivialization that the monument is being given a future. Because perhaps by denying the monument's significance and relevance, an alternative future may be assembled other than the one of ethnocentric division, which is being presented through the one-sided text panels at the site, and also manifested through the practices of commemorations on Vidovdan. So even if this does not specifically serve to create any hopeful narratives, it may be more positive and progressive than the narratives of ethnocentrism that could otherwise easily be generated within the current day situation, and sometimes very much is generated within the current day situation. So just to kind of summarize some of these arguments that I make, I understand that in order to kind of really unravel all these complexities, a longer presentation would be needed. But in general, you can say that the discussion of attitudes towards the ruins in Mostar and the avoidance of the gazebo monument in Kosovo suggests that in our understanding of memorials and commemorations, we need to consider not only how they refer to the past, but also whether and how they can act as places for looking forward, and also that these aspects may not be mutually exclusive. For example, in Mostar, for many older people, the ruins are ugly reminders of unpleasant memories, a hindrance to achieve a state of stability and permanence, while for many young people they can actually serve as future-oriented zones of activism, where narratives of suffering and victimhood are challenged for more progressive values and meanings. And in the field of Kosovo, the gazebo monument may be giving a future precisely for strategies that serve to deny its relevance. By locating this monument as an insignificant part of the past, strategies of trivialization and avoidance may serve to deny significance to the narratives of ethnocentrism that the monument would otherwise help to create in its present-day form and through the present-day activities at the site. So, in many ways, you can say that I argue for an approach to memories which does not view forgetting or remembering as inherently positive or negative, but that there is in each and every case a necessity to situate the negotiation between remembering and forgetting within a historically specific context in which various pasts and futures can be drawn upon, or as equally important, denied relevance through strategies of individual actors. And in this process, heritages can be both made and can be unmade. It's an ongoing process of making and unmaking heritage. And this is not about seeing a value in forgetting as opposed to remembering, or an encouragement of ignoring the past, but about recognizing that there is a great value and potential in heritage as an empowering tool to envision a different kind of future. And that's all I had to say here today. I'm very thankful for all of you listening to me, and I'm happy to also answer any questions you may have. And also, if you're interested, please read. There is some publications and books that is out there that you might find interesting if you look up. Thank you very much for listening, all of you.